I am thrilled to moderate today's dynamic discussion on the employee of the future. We have assembled a diverse group of individuals to share their unique perspectives on employees' shifting expectations and employers' innovative efforts to attract, engage, develop, and retain talent as we shape the future of work. Joining me on our virtual stage are John Kovac, SVP of Brand, Marketing, and Creative at Cox Enterprises, Dr. Vinod Vincent, Assistant Professor of Management at Clayton State University, and Fang, Head of Talent Acquisition and Diversity at A&E Networks. With all that being said, I am going to toss it to Dr. Vincent with our opening question. How are employee expectations changing?
Well, thank you, Rebecca. So as you know, the disruption caused by COVID-19, dramatically changed our concept of work and how we do it, right? In many ways, it sort of accelerated transformation, which otherwise would have probably taken another decade or more. So as we discuss embracing the employee of the future, which is a theme of this conference, I think it's important for us to understand that that employee of the future is already here, right? So this is not to say that we will not continue to evolve, but we need to acknowledge that the expectations of the employee of 2022 are drastically different than the employee of 2019, right? So there is a new normal, and going back to how it was before the pandemic does not seem to be an option in many cases, even though, some of us might be trying hard to do that, right? So, so what's happening or what's happened within the last couple of years is employees have started to sort of rethink everything from why we do work and how we work, right? So we have, started to reflect more on what's important in life and ask ourselves the question, is it really worth it? A little bit more often than what we used to, right? This is the main reason for the Great Resignation and the Great Reshuffle that's taking place right now as well. So employees, as you know, are quitting their jobs in record numbers, right? For example, over 4.3 million workers quit their jobs every single month this year, right? And a lot of them are switching to a new line of work, right? So when we consider the media and the entertainment industry specifically, which is the industry that most of you are in, attrition rates are about 10% based on one study conducted last year. It might differ a little bit right now. Some of the top reasons why US workers left jobs, especially in 2021, include low pay, lack of advancement opportunities, feeling disrespected at work, and the lack of flexibility, right? Overall, about 1 in 5 non-retired US adults say they quit a job at some point in 2021. So that's a lot of people, quitting their jobs, right? And shifting to a different job or a different career. So the trend does not seem to be changing. From the research that's being done right now, it seems like over 50% of employees are saying that they're open to looking for a new job within the next year, right? So based on the research done so far, a few shifts in employee expectations kind of stand out, right? And I will share some findings based on some of the larger scale studies that have been conducted so far within the past year or so, okay? So the number one thing, which is obviously no surprise to any of you, is that the flexibility is no longer considered to be a perk, right? It's a must-have, it's a necessity, right? Employees are expecting flexibility as a basic requirement in terms of where, when, and how they work. Some type of flexibility is expected even for jobs that can't be done remotely. Perhaps like a compressed work week or job sharing or some type of flexibility, right? And what we've been finding is that globally, about 80% of knowledge workers want flexibility in where they work, and 94% want flexibility in when they work, right? And when it comes to working moms, 83% want location flexibility, with about 66% preferring a hybrid, work arrangements. And when you consider the US, 95% of workers are looking for some sort of flexibility, with about 30% wanting unlimited flexibility, right? So as you can see, flexibility is front and center for today's employees, right? But what's also been found is that 70% of workers are not happy with the current level of flexibility offered by their employers, by their companies, right? So which largely, is responsible for some of the changes or the resignation that we're seeing in the market right now, right? So, when we consider the impact of flexibility, it's important to note that fully in-office workers are the least satisfied with their work arrangements compared to hybrid and remote employees. In research, they report significantly worse employee experience scores, especially for work-life balance and work-related stress and anxiety, right? And on the positive side, though, when employees are satisfied with their company's time and location flexibility, they're about 3 times more likely to report being happy and twice as likely to recommend working for the company, right? So also, when it comes to attracting talent, a LinkedIn study found that there is about 35% more engagements when a company's job ad mentions flexibility. And this actually goes up to 77% for Gen Z candidates, which are the newest entrants to the workforce, right? So flexibility, seems to be a big theme and an expectation for the employees of today. And another thing that stands out is, their concern with work-life balance and employee well-being, right? Some research has found that good work-life balance is the #1 priority for workers, followed by culture and pay. And a lot of workers, especially Gen Z and millennials, like to see more investments in mental health and wellness. And women, are about 41% more likely to engage with a job posting when it mentions, well-being, right? So well-being also seems to be an important thing for employees. And one of the last ones I've mentioned is the positive and caring culture has also become a top priority for employees, right? Not that it was not before, but it seems like it's even more prominent now, right? And during the Great Resignation, which is what we're in right now, a toxic corporate culture has been found to be 10 times more likely to predict attrition relative to compensation, right? And that's pretty significant, right? Which basically is saying that, if you have a toxic culture, your employees are 10 times more likely to look for another job, above when you compare it to pay, right? And on the other hand, if employees feel cared for at work, they are 3 times more likely to be happy at work and about 4 times more likely to recommend working for the company. And it's important to also note that employees think that improving company culture starts with investments in professional development, flexible work support, and mental health awareness. So, there are other shifts as well, but given the time constraints of this panel discussion, those are 3 things that stand out: flexibility, work-life balance, and employee well-being, and a positive and caring culture.
Thank you. Wow, that was a lot of great information. I think Fang, like I can attest to experiencing that on a day-to-day basis. So Fang, I'm going to toss it over to you. In light of that information that's just been shared in some of those studies, what's keeping you up at night in your role?
Well, first and foremost, I'm a mom of 2 young kids, so they're mostly what keeps me up on a daily basis. But the things that really come up for me is, I think first and foremost, like, what are our organizational muscles for change? We're just going to be experiencing more and more change, and change that, oftentimes we don't have a ton of control over. I think the pandemic has really laid bare that. While I think, many companies do sort of like disaster planning, I don't think, sort of a major pandemic and a shift to almost completely remote work for an extended period of time, and then what it would do to the global supply chain and on and on and on, we're ever in those scenarios. And I think in our now far far more like global economy, it's becoming harder to not have things impact what's going on in your day to day. So, you have something that's going on in Russia that has all of these sort of cascading effects and then may impact your business. You have something like a global pandemic. You have something like housing and zoning policies in one area leading to maybe shifts in how people view employment and whether they want to be there. And then how do we all as companies respond to that? How do we continue to build those muscles to be nimble? And that is on top of, I think, what we were already experiencing in the pre-times around this notion of disruption, which I know has become a little bit of a buzzword, but that's how we talked about change before. And it's that and all of these potential other things. And while that might have been true before, I think it's just that much more obvious now. So what can we as an organization, and then also from like a talent perspective, how do we build a talent community within your organization who can sort of collectively respond to all of these shifting needs, new ideas, disruptions. I used to joke before working in HR, like you can't make this stuff up. You feel like you've seen it all, and then there's just new things. And I think that's going to continue to be the case. And it's also possible that these disruptions get larger and larger, as well. And so, how do you equip a company collectively to be able to respond to that? I think the other thing that comes with that is during the pandemic and, with the rise of our social justice movements here, there's really been this push. And part of that, I think, is, in remote work, everyone had to be a little bit more authentic than, than they may were planning to be. And so this drive towards authenticity is something that I've really seen. And I think going back to what Vinod was saying around the workers want flexibility. I think part of that is just trying to get companies to be authentic and real about what is going on. I like to make a joke that, everyone wants to wake up in the morning, and whether it was you weren't feeling well the night before, or you had a terrible time getting your kids out the door, or like something broke in your house, to be able to at that moment say, you know what, it's not going to happen today. I'm just going to log on from home. Or the opposite of that, because your Wi-Fi is down, your air conditioning broke last week during the heat wave, during a major heat wave, whatever that is, to say, I'm definitely going into the office today because that's where I'm going to be most comfortable and productive. I think that element of choice is very real. And I think part of the reason why, workers are saying this matters so much to them is because it's what's real. It's we can all get on the same page about that. And I think there's going to be more demands for that, especially as you have generations coming up where that is more and more important. You're having a generation of folks who have lived their entire lives online, curated or not. And so being able to be more open about not having to hide what that doctor appointment is for, all of these things. So how do you bridge the gap between a workforce where part of it is like you absolutely keep it's personal, it's not work. There was a huge separation to now where it feels like, hey, this is a whole portion of my life, and I want to be able to live that fully together. And how do companies meet their employees who have different needs? Because part of authenticity is I want to keep some things separate, like that's okay too. And so how do you meet everyone where they are? And the other thing that I think about a lot, I have a dual role in diversity as well as in talent acquisition. And with Great Resignation, I'm sure if any of you recruiting professionals out there, I feel for you. It's been a rough year for all of us. But the big thing that I've noticed, and you've been hearing about this for decades now, is just the demographic shifts. Most recently, we talk a lot about that in sort of the demographics of race and ethnicity, but we don't often talk about age. Over time, with the birth rate the way that it is like we're going to have a larger piece of our workforce exit. And so our workforce overall is going to get smaller however many years down the road. Combined with that, a marketplace where the barriers to entry have just come down. Like think about like when you had to interview before, you had to take a day off of work to do it. It was really hard to get a new job. Now, especially if you're already working remote or hybrid, it's just an extra 30-minute meeting on the calendar, an hour meeting on the calendar. It's so much easier. And A&E, like a lot of companies, I think, even if companies believe that they are recruiting on sort of like a global or national, it's really local because you have to be able to commute. Like there's only so long that folks are willing to go to get to their job. And so you're seeing a lot of companies now competing in other locations, and where people have said that company isn't for me because I would have to move XYZ and I don't want to do that. Now you can do that if that company is offering remote options. And so overall, I think the workforce is shrinking for a variety of reasons. And so the question I think about is, how do you reach each pocket of the workforce, of the people in this country, to actually give yourself more options as a company to be able to recruit from, because it feel like it is going to be shrinking. So how do you maximize that pool, and what's the best way to do that? And a plus factor to that is that alone, just that statement, it makes your recruiting more inclusive because you are actively trying to include more and more groups as you try and sort of target your talent moving forward. So I have no answers to any of these, but that's where I spend a lot of my time thinking about these days.
Thank you, Fang. You surely got your plate full. But you've given us a perfect segue to John, who I think is going to address kind of the last topic that you brought up. And so, John, how can employers effectively communicate their brand to candidates and employees in response to everything that we're experiencing in the current marketplace? I think you're muted, John.
That might be one of those cuts. So what you've just heard is this kind of culmination of all these different elements that has created this fierce competition for employees. The interesting thing is it's no different than any other major, let's just say, consumer-facing category, right? Fierce competition, which what it really puts pressure on is a more sophisticated and deliberate approach to the brand and thinking about how we actually build employment brands and bringing many of the disciplines, many of the approaches, many of the ways that we've been building traditional brands over the years to our employment framework there. What we've also seen happening is this blending of mediums where we talk about the home life and the work life and how that blends together in both physical and mental spaces. You're seeing the same thing when we're talking about marketing mediums, right? We're seeing the blending of so much different information, content, mediums out there that differentiation is going to be the key. The great story in all of this is that if you have a tremendous brand, if you have a tremendous value proposition for your employer, you can win. And so the way that at least I think about this is 5 different major categories when you're approaching your employment brand. The first is to truly understand the brand, and that every brand are all of the different touch points of the customer. So the customer being people, being the talent, right? So you're talking about the different touch points, the different components of an employment brand are the people itself, the culture, the businesses, the position that someone's actually either retains currently or they're going out for. So all of those different touch points are really important. What you need to do is understand that and then build a strategic brand positioning and a motivating expression of that brand positioning. That's really key. So if you treat your employment brand like a traditional brand, you can really understand what it is you're selling. And you're selling this holistic experience for employees, all of these different touch points. And then you need to figure out, how do you expose that story? So once you understand what your brand is, what are your differentiators, what does the market for the talent you're looking for, what do they want in an employer, then you get into actually creating a meaningful and motivating story. And the real important part here is showing the story, not telling the story. You don't want to use a corporate narrative. You don't want empty messaging. You don't want to fall into the white noise that's out there from many corporations. And you see this day in and day out. We all see it. We all see it on LinkedIn. We see it through a variety of mediums and channels, or even events that we're at. You don't want to fall into that. You want a level of authenticity, but you want something that's truly motivating. And I'll get to that in a minute. We'll talk about the level of creativity, but storytelling is really key here. Now, the most important part of that storytelling is this third element, which is you need to employ masterful storytellers. Now, whether that means you're using external resources, internal resources, whether that means you're tapping into people within a people strategies or HR organization or in the marketing function, you need people who can really tell a story, show a story that's ultimately going to get people to feel a certain way and then act. And this is really key. And I'll give you an example. People on my team, we have people that have marketing, advertising, brand backgrounds. They've been doing this their entire career. And all they're doing now is refocusing that attention against employers versus XYZ brand. So the storytelling is really key, and having people that can do that well is important, because that leads to the fourth component, which is you need to get really creative. And this is about the where, when, how you're differentiating yourself, how you're inspiring this audience to act. And let me give you just one example. And I think that there's probably a number of companies that are on this call that are doing this really well. And there's probably some companies who maybe haven't paid as much attention here. Job descriptions. Perfect example is when we started our journey is in really revamping our employment brand. Job descriptions, probably one of the most effective and powerful tools, yet everyone ignores them, right? How many times have you read a job description and been inspired? Not very often. But when you do read that, when you do see that piece of inspiring content or that motivational line of copy, it makes a difference. And I actually pulled one. I pulled an opening line for a job description that we'd put together a few years ago. But just to give you an example. So I'm going to read the line. And if you were looking for a job and this was the first line or two that you read, would this inspire you? So here goes. There are plenty of people in the world who accept the way things are. You're not one of them, and neither are we. We are Cox, and our people are working together to solve the most pressing challenges of our time. Right? So just that, that kind of level of disruption that you didn't quite expect, that you expected, okay, we're looking for X, Y, and Z out there. How do you actually really examine all the different touch points, all the different ways that you can not only get your brand story told accurately, but the voice, the tone, the personality, I already get a sense of what it's going to be like working there, how people are thinking and talking and acting and behaving. And then the last part of it, and I love this about brands, I kind of call this the do better, right? So if I don't know if you've ever tried to give someone advice and kind of jokingly, your advice to them is just do better. But the idea is, how do you improve your story? Every great brand has an element of it that's aspirational. And what that means is that you write in the brand strategy elements that you aspire to that you're maybe not quite there yet. But what that does is that forces you to rewrite the script. It forces you to evolve the story. It forces you to get better as an organization. So not only do you use the brand to reflect what's in the organization today, but you use the brand to kind of put up that North Star of where you want the brand to go. And you do that through your communications, through your experience, through every part of the organization, but you also are holding each other within the organization accountable to get there. So figuring out how do you aspire to constantly kind of make it better. If you don't have a great story or you know there's missing pieces, that's where you can go and identify those gaps and really use it as an opportunity to change the organization. So those are just few of the tips that we think about day in and day out when we're approaching kind of what that brand story is that leads to what what we're here to talk about. It's really about how are we retaining great talent, how are we attracting the best talent, and then how are we motivating, empowering, and inspiring great performance of the people that we actually have in the organization.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing, John. It was interesting. There was a word that I heard you and Fang both use, and that was authenticity. And what I think was interesting is, although you each sit in different types of roles, there's the authenticity of, what's it like to work at an organization? What's the authenticity and what's my life? Like you said, Fang, I've got something broke last night at home, or I got to run my kids to the doctor or something like that. And employees feeling like they can be authentic with their employers. But then there's also the expectation from employees and candidates that employers are authentic about what it's like to work at an organization. And I think as someone who kind of oversees HR for my organization, that's feedback that we get. People want to know what it's like to work somewhere. And if you don't live up to who you say you are, whether it's in your job description, whether it's on your LinkedIn page, whatever it is, they're going to hold you accountable for that. They're going to call you out on it. So interesting how the authenticity kind of transfers in both the branding and then also in the HR area. So I'm going to toss some questions to you guys. Anybody feel free to answer or not, but a lot has changed in the last 6 to 12 months, as we know. I mean, we could go back full 24 months if we really want to, but I feel like even since this Great Resignation has really taken hold, it has just continued to change. But is there anything that you have seen organizations do really well in response, or that maybe something your organization has done to kind of adjust to how employees are expecting different things now?
I'll chime in. I think A&E Networks did this, but I think many other employers did as well. But just listening to their employees, I think this is probably the first time in a long time, at least in regards to the pandemic, where instead of just making a decision top down, I think a lot of employers actually said, let's hear what the people think and let that drive their decision making. And I think that was a huge step in terms of like the employee-employer relationship. I think after many years of like, well, whatever, the boss says goes, I think having that moment, and I think that's what employees are really hungry for, is to feel like they have an equal say in their day-to-day. Like we all spend a lot of time at work, that they have a say, a stake, a voice in that day-to-day, I think has meant a lot. And I think that's really worked well. And, I would say on the converse side, I think some of the employers who asked but didn't really take it into consideration or said, okay, my population wants X, but I'm just going to do Y because of whatever, and not have like good reasons or not have a great dialogue around it, I think has been challenging. And I think that's what we're hearing a lot of in the press these days.
I think to continue that thought, completely agree, is that the whys behind the decision. I think that starting out with the listening, starting out with the dialogue, and then if a decision is made, provide the context. Why is the decision being made? What were the considerations in the decision? I think that I've seen companies do that really well, and that helps. So even if the decision is not what XYZ employee wanted, they at least understand that there's some logical reason behind it. There was thinking and there was consideration of many different inputs before ultimately making that decision. In that context, on kind of the other side of the spectrum, when that's not provided, it seems, and maybe in some cases it is, but seems very arbitrary. It seems like the outcome isn't the goal. And that the decision was made without considerations of the people that it's going to affect most.
Just to add just a little bit to it, I think because both Fang and John talked about authenticity, and I was looking at some of the research that found that, when people consider their employers to be transparent, they're 12 times more likely to be satisfied with their jobs. Which is a big deal, right? So I think, like you said, that listening to the employees is critical, and especially when you consider retention, especially with the changing, job environment, right? Okay, are we going to go back full time in office? Are we going to do remote, or these type of questions even? I think right now, if you're just focused on like we used to, once a year employee engagement surveys to figure out what's going on, what people are thinking, that's not good enough, especially right now, right? You need to get really into it to understand your employees, because your situation might be different to some of the company. Even though you can use some of their best practices, you have to customize it to meet your employees, your organizational goals, and things like that. So having more in-depth conversations, whether it be town halls, whether it be focus groups, whether it be surveys, I think those type of things are important, so you understand your employees, where they're coming from, what they want, so that you can hopefully come up with strategies that will increase retention and also help you reach your organizational goals.
That's great feedback, and to kind of explain an experience that I went through that kind of went the exact opposite of what John said would work well. INSP, we've been back to work for quite some time. We were only home for 10 weeks back in 2020. And when we made the decision to come back and require everyone to come back, with limited exceptions, obviously, we received a lot of feedback. And I think we made the false assumption that, listen, we get to make this decision. And then it was, okay, we didn't want to feel like we were having to explain ourselves to the employees. But when we did explain why the decisions were made, hey, these are the precautions we're taking, this is what we're doing, it certainly helped with the messaging. So I think you're right. Employers have reached a point where even if you're not sharing the news an employee wants, just give it to them straight. They'd rather hear it straight and it not be what they want to hear than you to lie to their face just to make them feel better. And unfortunately for HR professionals, that's something we're probably used to, because we often have to share bad news. But there's a lot of great news that comes out of HR, but we're the ones that if there's a policy change or heaven forbid layoffs, we have to share that message. And so it's something that I think, unfortunately, we have a lot of practice in. You guys mentioned remote work, and I just mentioned that my employer is not remote. Do you all think that remote is here to stay? I know some large employers have said they're going to be pulling back on that. You think this is here to stay, or you think it's going to shift more in the office?
My personal prediction is that the employees are going to hold on to this as long. They will be milking it for every last moment that they can get. The feedback I've just heard from folks is, I get to coach my kids' baseball team now. I've never been able to do that before. I can go drive past my mom's house and bring her lunch now that she had her hip surgery. I've never been able to do that before. And to just get very direct and transparent, like that has always been allowed for a certain group of employees. Like I've had other jobs where it's like, so-and-so, he's in Florida the whole summer. Nobody else is allowed to be in Florida, but he's in Florida. Like there have always been those allowances for some, and I think it's just sort of like an equitable thing that it's now trickled to an entire organization. And so I think for as long as people can do it, they're going to try, because and there's this book that is coming out by two folks who have been doing remote work for many years, like pre-pandemic, and their argument in the book is it's even better than what you think it is, because we're doing remote work in a pandemic, but remote work not in pandemic, like you can work with your friends, like just both sit together. And right now our current systems, our social systems, are actually all kind of built around work. What this means is it gives people more time to put back into their communities, to join other organizations, to be a part of other things. And as we rebuild, if remote work is here to stay, if we rebuild those social connections elsewhere, then I think the argument that some leaders are making, which is like, we need to be around each other to work most effectively, like we need to have those relationships, it just won't be quite as important to folks if they have that elsewhere. So who knows, but my guess is folks are just gonna keep fighting the good fight as long as they can until someone tells them no.
I think a way to complement that is I believe that the momentum is going to be towards a pressure on impact and outcomes. And so I think a lot of what we're talking about here, remote can play into. So the impact and outcomes could be, I don't want to lose great talent, or I want to gain great talent. And this great talent wants remote work. So that may be one of those outcomes. It may be that that in some sector of employee type or employee function where remote work may be more productive, right? It's going to be the focus on kind of the end, and then the flexibility on how we get there. Because the other thing that we've seen in our organization is there's absolutely been a great gravity towards remote. But there are also employees that haven't done well in remote, and when given the opportunity to choose between the two, may choose the hybrid, or may choose actually a majority of in-person. Of course, there are job functions we have that have to be carried out in person, whether it's at one of our automotive auctions where you're physically moving cars around a wholesale automotive lot, or we have cable installers that are literally installing functional technical equipment in consumers' homes. But I think that understanding that it's the outcome that's the most important for a job function and the person, and people are going to have maybe a variety of different preferences in what works best for them, if those options are available to them, if they can kind of pick and choose. So I think that pressure on impact and outcomes, I think, is absolutely going to be there. And arbitrarily, hey, 5 days a week in an office just isn't going to cut it for the most part.
I think the one thing that I hear, and I've had this conversation with my staff on different things, it's we're really going to have to hold managers accountable. And because if the work is getting done, the work is getting done. So we need to equip managers to manage their people and trust them that if the work isn't getting done, to address it and get the person on the right track, whether that's saying, hey, you've got to come back in the office more because we just don't think you're really, thriving at home, or what that may be, but equipping managers to do what they're hired to do. All right, one last question. This Great Resignation has been going on for quite a while. We're now hearing it called the Great Reshuffling. I'm sure it'll have another new name before long. How much longer do you think we in HR are going to be going through this? Poor Fang and I are just dying over here. So how much longer before we see some light at the end of the tunnel? Any predictions?
I think that this Great Resignation, if you look at it, right? Yeah, the pandemic kind of exacerbated it for sure, but it's been happening for a while, even before the pandemic, right? So it's really not gonna go away, right? Employees wanted to change, wanted to shift, priorities changing, and things like that. But I think for employers who look at it, I guess in a positive way, it's actually an opportunity, right? If you look at it, John talked about differentiating, Fang talked about authenticity and things like that. Okay, how do I capitalize on this opportunity where people are looking to shift more easily than they used to, right? So two things: how do I retain the people I have, but then how do I attract, the people who are looking to move by adjusting our practices to meet the demands of the current workforce. So I think that's key for the employers to look at it as an opportunity to gain a competitive advantage and move forward from there.
I think also a lot of localities are coming out with wage transparency laws. So I think it's probably going to get worse before it evens out, which I think it's great. I having been both a candidate and a recruiter on both ends, it's great, I think, to have that conversation up front. And I think it is great for employees as they're trying to figure out, like, what do I want to do, right? And I think as you hear from like employee engagement surveys, like no one ever scores highly on I'm well compensated for the job, probably across all companies. But it gives people a way to go out and see like, am I, like, is it just me, or you know, or am I actually doing okay in the job that I have? And is making a change worth it for whatever the dollars might be? So you know, I think there's a lot of positives coming out of that, but I think it will also cause a wave of additional resignations as people see that they could make the leap to so-and-so company and make that much more, especially as, you know, the barriers to interviewing and stuff continue to be low.
And I think in all of that, you're going to see the best products win, right? So you're going to see those companies that are doing it really well, that have great cultures, and cultures, as we all know, does not require in person. That can be part of it, but you're going to see great cultures win, and you're going to see that mounting pressure on other organizations if they want great talent to shift or become extinct. And so I think you're going to continue to see the companies that are doing it well today probably do well until we see a little more of that right sizing across different industries. But that pressure is going to be there. And if we were all to rewind 3 years ago, I mean, our talent acquisition efforts were as important as ever, right? I mean, we're talking about talent and how do we continue to retain great talent? How do we attract amazing talent that was so critical? This has just accelerated gaps that have been there for years across these industries. So I think that I think it becomes the new norm. We're never going to get on the other side of it. We're just going to continue to evolve and advance.
Excellent. Thank you all for the very engaging panel discussion. And I think at this time we will transition to any questions that have come through while this has been shared.
One, go.
Lots of great chatter and communication going on the chat box. So thank everyone for that. I have one question, Fang, I'm going to toss it to you. And if others feel like you have something to share, please feel free. But have we seen a shift in desire for employees to also see an involvement and response to social injustice and human rights issues from their employers? And does that carry any weight in terms of employee satisfaction?
That's a great question. And as with all things in DEI land, no sort of easy black and white answers here. So the first thing I will say is keep in mind, people aren't a monolith. That, you know, depending on what any employer wants to declare or respond to, there will be folks who cheer that and folks who are not so happy about that. And that is sort of true in all cases. The other thing that you want to think about with this is, how do you balance the aspirational with the authentic? So the one thing that, you know, I hear sort of consistently is, if you are going to put yourself out there as a company about a cause or issue or respond to something, if you don't back that up with additional actions afterwards, folks are going to start to get the message, you know. So that phrase that we were all taught when we were kids, like actions speak louder than words, it is totally true in this space. And so that's not to say, you know, I think there are plenty of employers who are out there making statements because they feel like that's the thing that they have to do to sort of, quote, not be left behind, and it makes sense for like a marketing perspective, and that will give you an initial lift with certain parts of your employee base. But if there's nothing behind that, then, you know, all those messages that you will put out will be maybe great from a candidate perspective, but your current employees are going to feel sort of like, I don't know that folks are really into this. And then that will come through. The other thing to think about is whether you as a company want to do this because your employees are pushing for it, or do you want to lead in that space? So you can choose which path you want to go down. So for example, nobody from Apple said, hi, do you want a little computer in your hand with all these colors and you can track your entire life from it? They just put that out there, and then we as a society followed their lead. So you as a company could choose to do that from this DEI space. Even if your employees are not clamoring for it, you could choose to say, we want to lead in this space, and we that's the step that we want to take. You could also say, hey, our employees are really clamoring for it, and therefore we want to respond to their needs. The thing that I would say is just be thoughtful of how you do that authentically, and how do you also share like where you as a company are, because if you don't have the follow through, it's just going to fizzle, and that'll be sort of more detrimental than not doing anything in the first place. The last thing I'll say about it is listen, there will always be a group of employees where they feel like, now that someone else is being included, does that mean I'm getting excluded? And you want to be prepared of how to address that. And while like, hey, in studies we see that that's not true, there are folks that will have those feelings, that will have those thoughts. That doesn't necessarily mean that's a fact, but how do you still address and engage those employees as well? Because you don't want to leave them out of the conversation.
Excellent, thank you. Any feedback on that from Vinod or John? I think Fang's kind of our expert in that area, but I'll give you that chance either way. All right, I will toss up another question to you. If you could give one piece of advice to the employers who are watching this, the HR professionals, in light of everything that we've seen in the changes of expectations from employees and candidates over the last couple of years, what would you recommend that they do?
I'll jump in there. We've talked a lot about authenticity, and there's nothing more authentic than how your employees talk about their experience. And so I'd say lean into that, listen to that, evolve the story, and the way you evolve the story is by evolving the experience. And again, if you want to showcase that you're a place where people should want to come, highlight, spotlight, allow the voices of your employees to be heard in a really engaging way, so you can really show people what it's like, and that you're not just speaking to them with artificial messaging.
I think that's good advice.
Well, to add to that, I think I mentioned earlier that understanding your employees is key, right? Understanding your situation too is key. We talk about the great reshuffle a lot, but how does it impact your organization in particular is very important. Who are we? Are we losing anyone? Who are we losing? Are we losing our top performers? That kind of questions. And if we are we conducting good enough exit interviews to allow us to understand why they're leaving, right? These kind of things is really important. And like I said before, understanding your employees, once a year through a survey, I don't think suffice. You have to do more. You have to sit down with them to understand, or utilize a third, independent party if you need to. But knowing their needs, their wants, their struggles is important. And if you do that, I think, like I said before, there is a great opportunity for those employers to differentiate themselves and gain a true competitive advantage.
I'll also make a plug for don't be afraid to talk about what you don't know and have some of those direct conversations. I think often, all of us are like solutions oriented. Like we want to go fix a thing. The problems that we're all going to be facing in the coming years are going to get stranger and stranger potentially. And there's going to be a lot of stuff that we all don't know. And so pull additional people into the room and start by really trying to figure out what you do know, what you don't know, how to get some of those answers before we start trying to solution or put band-aids on things, and just spend more time in that sort of like the problem versus the like, oh, we got to fix this all now, because some of your best solutions may not even get to the table without spending some of that time up front.
Excellent. Thank you all for the advice. We can all use it. Another question, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them into the chat and we'll get to them. But we talked a lot about what has changed about employees' expectations. What about employers? I mean, I think as an HR professional, my expectations have changed. I think my executive management's expectations have changed over the last couple of years. It's a two-way street. What have you seen from that side of things?
I think from what we are seeing, there actually seems to be a disconnect, right, between what employers want and what employees want, right? Employers, a lot of them would like to go back to how things were before the pandemic, but obviously times have changed. So I think for employers, you really do have to manage your expectations and be able to adapt to the new environment. So I think that's key. Like I said before, and I know I repeat myself here, but understanding your employees, and adjusting accordingly is going to be important.
That's such a great point. The first thing that popped into my head on the recruiting side is like when I meet with hiring managers, it's all about speed. We live in an Amazon Prime two-day delivery world, and we sort of go in, whether we mean to or not, expecting that. And my team's job, my job as a recruiter, is to say, these are not folks sitting in a warehouse that you filter and then they show up. Like, these are people. And so I think I agree that there is a little bit of that disconnect there. And I think employers reminding themselves that that their employees are people, and they should have expectations accordingly of people, and that some of those things are not as crazy as sound. Like, people have different demands and wants and needs from a package, and like reminding themselves of that, I think, will be really important. And I think, on the inclusion side, so much of this, like closing the gap, like oftentimes we think about things as like people are here, and really it's just about how do you close the gap between, any two, any relationship. And I think that'll be a big challenge going forward.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that employers are trying to figure out how to do this at scale. We've reached an incredible level of personalization and customization, the way people want to and are able to work, and understanding how you do that in large organizations is really complex. It's really hard work, and it's work that hadn't had to be done like this before. So I think a level of focus in how that happens in an organization is what they need to be focused on, what they need to be spending time against, and what they will be investing resources against in the coming future.
Thank you all. I think for me, sitting here as not only a part of this panel, but also as an attendee, the thing that kind of gave me comfort is saying that, or hearing you all say that there's this disconnect. And because I think, when we're in this boat, we're, like you talked about candidates, Fang, they think it's an Amazon warehouse. The analogy I use with my team is, everybody wants a unicorn. The best we're going to get them is a three-legged purple horse. And finding a way to communicate that disconnect so no one feels like it's a disconnect and everyone is doing the best that they can. So hopefully this has been encouraging for the rest of the people who are listening, because I think we're all kind of in this same boat. Which is a boat that I think we've been in for longer than we thought we would, and we don't quite know where we're going. But I think that's what we've continued to hear from this. It's the be authentic. And, Fang, you even said, if it's something you're not prepared to talk about or don't know, don't be afraid to, because sometimes that's where you get the best relationship with a hiring manager or with a candidate or with a colleague, is talking about the things that you think, gosh, I don't know if we're ready to talk about that, but that's the only way you're gonna go forward from there. So I'm not seeing any more questions. So unless any more pop up, I think we're about ready to wrap up our session. Unless the three of you have any last parting words, and kind of, where we go from here, but I do thank you each for your time and your expertise and the research that you did to prepare all of us and talking with us about this challenge. I think we could have this panel every year because employee expectations do change every year, if not every other week, it feels like. So I think that's the biggest thing that we all recognize from this is the challenges of it. The challenges are not going away, but we're all in it, whether you work in the cable world or in the connectivity world or any other world, we're all in this same situation together with the expectations changing and managing through them. So just want to say thank you all. And I think that wraps up our session.
Thanks, everyone.